Leaders from across the Middle East have joined President Bush in Annapolis, Maryland, for U.S.-sponsored Middle East peace talks. Delegates from over 40 countries, including Syria, are participating in the talks. Hamas and Iran are noticeably absent from the negotiations. To discuss the first day of the conference is Hanadi Loubani, a producer and analyst for the EREAL News. Hanadi, here's what President Bush had to say to the meeting today.
Today, Palestinians and Israelis each understand that helping the other to realize their aspirations is key to realizing their own aspirations. Both require an independent, democratic, viable Palestinian state. Such a state will provide Palestinians with the chance to lead lives of freedom and purpose and dignity.
So, Hanadi, as a Palestinian, do you think this gives Palestinians hope?
This is the most important questions that Palestinians are asking. Why now, after a 7-year void in the Palestinian-Israeli negotiation, due mostly to the Bush's administration neglect of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? If there is an answer to the why, it's an answer that reflects more the interests of the Americans in the region rather than the rights and the interests of the people, especially the Palestinians in that region. Especially after what the Arabs and the Palestinians perceived is the defeat of Israel and the victory of Hezbollah over the summer war in Lebanon. Iran has been claiming most of the credit for Hezbollah's so-called victory or perceived victory. And so Iran has really made a lot of strides when it comes to owning the Palestinian issue and to being the champion of Palestinian rights in the region. When
President Bush speaks about the aspirations of the Palestinians, the aspiration of the Israelis, and most of the media when they treat this subject, it's kind of as two equal players in a dispute over territory. How do Palestinians think of this kind of coverage and language?
Well, I think that's the problem with all of the Americans' proposals, the fact that they're not anchored in international law. If you look at what's happening in Annapolis, the Israelis are asked to make painful concessions. But these painful concessions, according to the standards of international law, this is what Israel should abide by. So I think this is the most important question for Palestinians, is why the Americans continue to evade international law, which they see as the only discourse that guarantees their national rights as a nation. And this is a question that Palestinians continue to ask.
Abbas seems to consider this conference quite historic. Here's a clip from Abbas about what he thinks this moment represents.
I am not making an overstatement, Mr. President, if I say that our region stands at a crossroad that separates two historical phases, pre-Annapolis phase and post-Annapolis phase. In other words,
do you think Palestinians agree with him?
I think Abbas is setting himself at this point for a trap by portraying Annapolis as a historic step when almost everyone is projecting the failure of Annapolis.
Why is he talking with such language?
The rewards for Abbas are great. If the Israelis give Abbas some concession on what everybody's been calling the soft core issues, Palestinian prisoners, checkpoints, settlements, then Abbas can go to the Paris donor conference in December 17 and ask for the money that he needs to consolidate his power in the West Bank.
There's 2 points in Abbas's speech where he lays out a sort of line in the sand on issues that won't be compromised. Here's what he had to say.
It's my duty to say that for us peace, we need the fate of the city of Jerusalem to be a critical component in any peace accord that we might reach. We need East Jerusalem to be our capital. To my people and relatives in the Gaza Strip, you are at the core of my heart. The hours of darkness will end in the face of your resolve and determination, for your insistence on the unity of our people in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip as one geographical political unit without any divisions.
There hasn't been any indication from Israel that they're going to compromise on Jerusalem or the question of a contiguous state, has there?
There were many in Olmert's government who were signaling that, Israel is ready for a land swap, that Israel is ready to give up all of East Jerusalem in return for Israel annexing some of the major settlement blocks in the West Bank to Israel proper. But I think that this is a very contentious issue in Israel. Only last week, a motion was passed by the Knesset that prevents Olmert from dividing Jerusalem.
If this is something achievable within Israeli politics, to give up East Jerusalem, and I know it's a big if, is that enough to make a deal in terms of popular Palestinian opinion?
Many Palestinian analysts have said that we can no longer talk about the Palestinian people at this point, that the Palestinians are a completely fragmented national community with different agendas and different priorities. Palestinians in the West Bank are willing to compromise the right of return in return for East Jerusalem, in return for the freezing the settlement activity in the West Bank, in return for freedom of mobility and movement in the West Bank. So I think Abbas was mostly speaking to his Palestinian constituency in the West Bank and not speaking to the Palestinian constituency in the diaspora, in the refugee camps in Lebanon or in Syria, and definitely not to the Palestinian diaspora in Europe and North America.
Hamas has denounced this peace conference. What will be the plan here? If there is a deal, then this is a deal to, in the final analysis, to try to eliminate Hamas in Gaza, or you just let Gaza be its own prison, as people have described it?
I think Abbas has a number of options when it comes to Gaza. The first option is to completely forget Gaza and let it, as they're predicting, rot under the Hamas control, basically deprive it of all forms of aid, deprive it of all forms of trade and all of that, so that people will have to suffer endlessly because they've chosen Hamas to live under a Hamas government. The second option that Abbas has is that there have been voices within Hamas, more what they call pragmatic voices within Hamas, that have been calling for negotiations with Fatah and with Mahmoud Abbas. And so his other choice is maybe to appeal to these pragmatic voices. Gaza will never be part of a Palestinian state. This suits the interest of the Israeli right very well, who refuse territorial contiguity between the Palestinian states. So those who do not choose peace can live in this large prison of Gaza and rot under a Hamas government, and those who choose peace and painful concessions will live in a kind of a more prosperous West Bank Palestinian entity.